Okay, so usually my videos are long-winded and a little fluffy as opposed to dense and meaty. So to contrast that, this one will be more short bites of thoughts I've randomly collected, or really it's more just a consortium of scribblings, each either half-cocked or incomplete, but I'm putting them out there in a flurry of sticky note type chaos so as that any and everyone can deconstruct, learn from, add to, argue over, or maybe just laugh at, but hopefully at least think about. So here we go. And there's a big storm outside, so don't mind the thunder. As it goes for networking, each individual acts like a string reaching out across all other strings and connecting a web of an idea, each member having a unique influence on the harmony of this entity. There's the thunder. I was raised Christian, so here's an analogy. Satan trying to overthrow or be as powerful or the same as God is a metaphor of man trying to master or control the whole of his kind, trying to be the ruler over the God that is within all of us. I have a world map as a shower curtain. So I was thinking, as I was in the shower the other day, that Europe has had plenty of hardships, whereas America, on its own soil, has had little. And this can or has exacerbated the economic terrorist threat crisis reaction in America due to the developed thin skin. And so we have a fallacious need for government protection. And this is like staying inside all the time as to not get sunburned. But when one goes outside, they are that much more vulnerable to the sun exposure for doing so. What has to happen to stop any force, like the federal government, is to have an uprising against said force, even when there is comfort held by the very masses that are in revolt. As for democracy and how it performs poorly in most situations, let's say that I'm at a party and a decision is made to make a beer run, and there are votes cast in favor of which beer to get, and I submit my vote for beer X, yet am overruled by the majority in this makeshift democracy. Now we come to the end of this scenario where there is the American-style democracy, or the democratic end to the situation, and there is the anarchic end. In the American law scenario, you would be forced to drink your beer that the majority voted on. And not only would you be forced, but this force is backed by imprisonment or death. So it's like we put you in jail or kill you if you don't drink this beer. Though in the anarchic model, you have the freedom to choose not to drink the beer. You know, like, wow, what a nice option, you know. So in the anarchic form of non-governance, you always have more power derived from individual rights as opposed to groups or states' rights. The sovereignty is definitely held at the personal level. As far as talking to people, when your brain creates a thought, there is a process where millions of nerves or brain cells are talking to each other, and in a flash, gathering all the knowledge of the collective to compose a single discernible response that not only has had its effect from the subconscious, but also the refinement of the upper levels of cognition. So it is the same with language and conversation within the culture of humans. Each person has their own set of knowledge to draw from, to offer in the creation of an idea forming by the conversation of millions of people. When having a conversation, each person contributes their own particular version of the situation. Over time, a consensus is made by the virtue of an action like war, art, or technological advancement, or whatever. Little side note, kind of tired of this line between the line being blurred between unacceptable behavior and humor, or comedy. When a person, like especially a friend of ours, acts in a malform of behavior, and there's usually like this response to see this less than prudent choice as a symbol of jest, or that they only did it for the sake of humor, when in all reality it's like this crappy thing they did, and we just overlook it and say, oh, you know, it's funny or whatever. Anarchy is better than a state geographically containing the diversity of law as described by the Constitution, because in having a state dictate the variation of law, there's still the requirement to physically move to find alternative laws more suitable to one's personal idea of individual liberty, as opposed to anarchy, where one has the freedom to enter and exit any imposition or influence through voluntary contractual negotiation with multiple businesses, catering to emergent needs through the mechanism of free market interaction. As far as the Constitution, you know, if it didn't work the first time, then why would we expect it to work now or in the future? You know, I can agree to hold true to the values within its pages, but the Constitution itself is not enough. We have to have, you know, some kind of social change accompanied with the reinstallment of constitutional type values, but leaving room for any kind of government is obviously not going to work out, because as small as it starts off, it's going to always grow in self-interest, and it'll, over a long enough time, might end up turning into kind of what we have going on now, more socialistic system. I had some arguments with a roommate, and they kind of came up with this, that we're basically in a worst case scenario of anarchy, where the largest corporation or whatever has a full geographic control over people of this area. But the difference is that in anarchy there would be this understanding that you could just choose not to obey the laws of that of the government. Choose instead another court-type system with police protection and such to ascribe to. And the more people that the current government picks off, then the more will go to a competing system of justice and safety or whatever. So it'd just be a change in mindset and then an improvement, whereas the state kind of gives us a bit of a roadblock to that kind of improvement. Which brings me to my overall apprehension for the state itself. I've always been apprehensive to use what I now recognize as the state or system, though I was not always aware of it, and by it I mean the notion of a state as opposed to the notion of a lack of state. Much like being unaware of the notion of lack of God as a theist, through ignorance you could say I was by default a statist. I, as many others, took for granted in a way the state or the premise of our need for it, never questioning the legitimacy, but even in this sleepwalk of political idiocy, has still had the subconscious notion to avoid or separate from and have as little interaction as possible with this social contract under rule by an ultimate sovereign, democracy. Even without the full understanding of such concept, I was, at a certain level anyways, aware enough to have a resistance to it. Some of this, I'm sure, was due to being a kid, but there certainly were other kids who, in comparison, were far more cooperative, showing my status as a fringe element. When I came upon the then fresh, to me, idea of anarchy, there was a comfort of home there. I felt as if I had found a precious jewel that I did not know existed, yet recognized as soon as was discovered.